Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Professor Kotler. This is an amazing pleasure having you with us. Welcome, Mr.
Thank you, Luis.
Regisin. So welcome, everybody. As you know, we are streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and our own academy. So you are very welcome. Nobody's going to miss this. It's going to be recorded too, and you will have access to the recording. So let me introduce Mr. Regisin and Professor Kotler. As you know, Mr. Regisin is a board of the World Happiness Foundation. We are so happy and so honored to have you as part of the board. Mr. Regisin is the CEO of Regisin, an amazing company focused on technology in India, and supporting many initiatives around happiness in India and around the world. So thank you so much, Mr. Regisin, for joining us today.
Well, good. And, I'm so happy, Mr. Singh, about seeing you as part of the group gathered to hear about the development of more happiness in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Kotler.
Yes.
You are our hero. I mean, we all look up to you, and it's such an honor to be face to face with you or Zoom to Zoom with you.
Well, thank you so much. And Louis, you and Dr. Singh and others, thank you for starting to focus on not the gross national product. We all want good economies, but we also want good societies. And I got interested in this years ago when friends came from a trip they took to a place they called Bhutan, of which I knew nothing. But I had never had any tourists, friends, ever tell me with such happiness what they had experienced. They found a society there that was so unusual in its happiness. Well, they didn't know themselves that the prince or the leader of the country himself wanted to have his people happy, and developed with others an index, which is the beginning of trying to really know, is a city happy? Is a country happy? Is the world happy? And so he did such a successful job in his country that he had reached a point, I heard, where he wanted to retire from being the king of Bhutan. And they wouldn't let him. He says, but I'd be happier if I could quit. And he said, that's the problem. You would lower the index if you quit. So I remember that story. And I therefore am so grateful that you invited me to share some ideas I have, even though it's not called happiness, it's called the common good. Yes. And I'm postulating that there's a strong connection between a country where people practice the common good and where that country will have a lot of happiness. So do you mind if I start sharing this idea with you?
Please, Professor Kotler, and just a short introduction. Everybody knows.
Yes, Dr. Kotler, if you can connect your advancing common good with common happiness, that yes, will be great for this this forum.
If we can put the word common in front of happiness, that would be a good step. Yes.
There you have the marketing genius. So just so you know, everybody, of course, you know Philip Kotler, Professor Kotler, but just a short introduction. For many, and for me included, you are the father of modern marketing. I still remember when I moved from Spain to New York and I had to lead the marketing function of these big professional services called Deloitte. And I said, well, I was on Broadway looking through the window and I said, what do I do? I took your book and I said, okay, this is what I have to do. And then you were inspiring me very, very much to write my first book on marketing, and having you here now connecting marketing, business, common good, and happiness. To me, this is this is big. This is really, really big.
Thank you.
So just so you know, and we are super happy to have you here. And I think probably the first question, I think, Rekistin, you have one to connect happiness and common good. Maybe that can lead you to start with your slide. I know that you want to share some slides. So I wanted to share you how personally I'm so thrilled having you here.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. And I will start now. I believe your audience can see my slides now.
Yes.
And it shows a picture of the book that I wanted to write badly because of what I could call the concept of common good.
You have to share the screen, Professor Kotler, you have to share the screen. You have to click on the share screen button.
Yeah, I'm going to do that right now.
Yeah.
Okay. But now I want to go to this, I think. And how do I enlarge that?
Just click on it, it'll come.
Okay, good. And let's move on.
Here we are.
All right, now I am moving my arrow, but I want to move past the slide here. I want to go to the next slide.
So move your arrow to the front key, the forward key.
No, whatever we did, wait, you are screen sharing. Is that the problem? And I should stop the share? No.
No, you are screen share. You have to move, click on the arrow button on your keyboard.
Yes, I am clicking on my arrow button. There we do. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're able to start. Everyone knows that we are living through crises, not just one, but several. It's actually a perfect storm. And in the case of each of the crises, there will be views on how to handle it. There will be some views which would make the crisis worse, and some to make it better. And you need a standard. We need a standard for what do we do with the COVID problem? Do we tell people to keep going to work and to school and so on and let it spread further, or do we tell them to stay home, don't worry about the economy until we all get better, and then it will be the right time? So there are two views there, and what's for the common good? Which is the better move? So let's go ahead. And we say that in choosing a policy, the argument will be, does it improve the common good? Many policies, most policies are not chosen on that basis. They're chosen by a leader of a country or a company. Does it help me? Or does it help my family? Or does it help my political group? But these decisions that are made often with a narrow standard, not the common good, will have a big impact on so many people. And therefore, we need to have a methodology of thinking through what is the best policy for the common good. So let's move on. By the way, that does relate to what kind of economy you have. Do you have an economy where every citizen votes on each issue? That's the way they used to do it in New England when they started our early founding fathers. They were trying to do a direct democracy where each major issue is voted on by the people. This goes way back to ancient Greece when citizens in Athens voted, all of them. You know, it's like today when we talk about a referendum where the citizens are trying to create a policy. That is not the way our democracy works. We're lazy people. So we vote every so often for legislators, and we leave them to vote for us. And we hope they're voting for our interests, but they may be voting for their own interests. Today, many people are cynical about our politicians in every country, that they're not really voting in the interest of the people they represent. They're voting in the interest of the donors who got them elected, the money that came from people who want certain things for their own advantage. Now, the third thing that might happen in a country where you leave so much power to the president that one man is deciding on what is the common good. He never uses the expression. And in fact, he never works for the common good. He works for his base. So the question of common good and democracy are very related. So what is the way to vote for the common good? It's not by voting for what's best for me now, what's best for my group now, but what's best for most people. So a little history. In Britain, they had a marvelous, gifted legislator, Jeremy Bentham, who in the 1780s wrote a lot of things about democracy, British type democracy, and he proposed what he called the common good standard, which he also called the greatest happiness principle. And happiness, he defined as, very simply, pleasure minus pain. In other words, if there's a surplus of pleasure over pain, it's happiness. So he wanted a society and the legislators, those who represent us, when they are looking at public policies, to decide on which policy would create the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And that was the origin of the philosophy movement called utilitarianism, that actions should be taken to increase the common good. Now, just to make it very precise, let's say you're facing a policy decision. Very simply, count the number of people who are likely to be made happy by that decision. Leave out the people who are not impacted at all. Subtract the number of people who are made unhappy. So it's A minus C. And if that's a number greater than 0, then it is the better solution. It creates more common good. Sometimes there are 2 policies among several. Both of them create more happy people than unhappy people. And in that case, just choose among those 2 good policies, the one that creates even the greater level of happiness than the other one. Both create happiness. That's all that this mathematical statement means. So going ahead, let's apply this to 2 particular decisions as an illustration. Should we pass a wealth tax on the super rich? You may know that one of our great economists from France, Thomas Piketty, not only wrote a classic book on income inequality, but he's a major advocate of a wealth tax. But the question is, would a wealth tax increase the common good or hurt the common good? Most citizens favor the wealth tax when asked. If you ask them, this isn't a tax on you, it's a tax on billionaires, let's say. They favor it. Why? Because it's not going to be a tax on them at all. And there's only a few people who will be unhappy, those who are taxed, who are the super rich. So I would draw the conclusion that one can justify that a wealth tax would advance the common good because it will make a very large group happier. And happier in the sense that the tax money then is used, I have to spell this out, for improving the education and the health of people. And then only a small group is unhappy. So let's take a second illustration. Workers' wages. Yes, if you raise as a company the wages of your workers, it will reduce the profits initially of your shareholders who actually own the business. But it's very clear that the more workers would be made happy by a raise of pay than the number of shareholders who notice it and are hurt. So in the long run, raising workers' wages is for the common good. And we can take many illustrations and reason them out in this way. As a matter of fact, this is really the work of what we call movements, political movements. Many of them are familiar. Progress comes from big social movements. Equal rights for women. That didn't even happen in the United States until the year the 19th Amendment. I think it was 1919 that women got the right to vote. Workers' rights, consumers' rights. All these movements are actually what I would call progressive. They advance the state of people's lives and happiness. And we could prove that more people are made better. I mean, just take any one of them, and you'll test it, and you'll see many more people are better off, and far fewer people are worse off. So the whole idea of the common good, whether it is stated as such or just making progress, is being carried out by all of us, but particularly by altruists, caring individuals, humanitarians, and mainly by people who devoted their lives. They're reformers and activists like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, and some of our top presidents in the United States were pursuing the common good. And there are companies who care about the common good. That is, they like to make profits, but the purpose of the company goes beyond profits. It may be sustainability, making sure that the environment is better, that they don't hurt the environment as they make their profits, and so on. And we can easily identify companies that care about people's welfare. Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and even that company was purchased by Unilever, which kept the same philosophy even after acquiring Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's, by the way, would give 10% of their profits. The company was located in Vermont, and they would give 10% of their profits to good common causes after each year. The Body Shop, Unilever, Tom's. Why did I list Tom's? Apparently, if you buy a pair of shoes from Tom's, because you bought a pair of shoes, they're going to give a pair of shoes to a poor family. So you're doing good when you buy your own shoes from Tom's for some other person as well. Salesforce is a very interesting company in San Francisco whose CEO cares greatly about the common good. In fact, he's asked all of the big companies in San Francisco to put together money from their own resources to help in the problem of homelessness. San Francisco, a beautiful city, is full of homeless people. And that leader wanted to raise money to make places for people who are homeless to live with a shelter. So there are companies that we want to single out. As a matter of fact, the Forbes company, which produces the Forbes magazine, had an issue where they listed 100 just companies. Now, the word just means J-U-S-T, but what they meant really is justice. 100 companies that follow justice, practice justice, that are meeting the needs of most Americans. And by that, we mean the stakeholders, in a sense, those like workers, customers, communities, the environment. And what do they mean by a company that deserves to be called a just company? On the right, you'll see it's a company that pays a fair wage, acts ethically, pays a living wage, provides benefits to the workers, makes products that don't harm anyone, provides equal opportunity, minimizes pollution, makes safe and reliable products, creates quality and stable jobs. That's a list, and it's a good list. And we may be able to add a few more things or condense these into fewer things. But the winners, the year I looked at this, were companies that are familiar to us, that you could say, yes, Microsoft is really advancing the common good. Apple is, P&G, and so on and so forth. I'll leave the details for you to look at. So what can a company do that wants to join the other companies that are good companies, that are just companies?
Yeah.
So maybe someone in my audience is running a company or part of a company anyways. Can your company define a greater company purpose than just making money for the shareholders? That should be included in the role, but can there be some purpose like sustainability, environment, whatever, greater than that? Can the company, your company, show the company's actions that do benefit all the stakeholders? Now, the word stakeholder is different than the word shareholder. A shareholder owns a share of the company. And you have to understand that historically, we felt that the company owners are the ones who should benefit, really. I mean, the others are lucky to get a job with the company and do some work, but the company's there to make money for the people who put money at risk to start the company. So the word stakeholders is a broader, it's so much broader than shareholders, and it includes the shareholders as well, that we are now using a term called stakeholder capitalism. Namely, we have moved from shareholder capitalism, where you only benefit the shareholders, to a larger idea called stakeholder capitalism, where there is a sharing of the rewards for capitalism among all the people in the team who help make the company successful, the employees, suppliers, distributors. So the third thing your company could do, besides having broad purpose and good purpose, you could choose actually some cause. Improving water quality. You know, Coca-Cola spends a lot of time worrying about this because if they can't find good water, they can't make Coke. And they have become very active about conservation of good quality water, protecting forests, fighting pollution. Those are signs of caring. Now, it's interesting. I could pause for a minute if there's any questions. What's your thinking, or should I go on?
I think you should go on, but we are enjoying a lot, especially the examples. I have more questions later, so yes, please.
Okay, I know, and the fact is, I am looking forward to the questions. But it's interesting because the World Happiness Foundation is working on the idea of what kind of index would really measure the happiness movement. And there have been two big studies that didn't choose happiness as such. They were more comprehensive. And I want to compare them. One was done by the Wharton School. It's called the Best Countries Study. And they wanted to do this. Can you establish that a country is a great country, that it's a best country in the way it does things? And what they used for their index were 5 things. Does that country care about sustainability? Does it care about entrepreneurship? Does it lead to good economic influence, good adventure, good culture? And in that study, they rated about 80 countries. The winners, countries we can call best countries, believe it or not. Number 1 was Germany. 2 was Canada. Then UK, US, Sweden, Australia, Japan, France, and Netherlands. And you can look at the study, and the details are, it's really taking a lot of indices, weighting them, giving some weight to the different indices, and then say, this is the best country if it has all these things going. Now, another person named Simon Anhalt says a best country isn't what we are after. We're after a good country, a country that cares about the world and the people everywhere, that spends a lot of time with science and technology, advancing science and technology, international peace, caring about world order, planet, and caring about prosperity and equality and so on. That study which covered 140 or more countries, ended up with the following winners: Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, UK, Switzerland, Germany, Finland, and so on. Now, it's very interesting to me. There's some overlap. For example, Germany is only a best country, but not a good country. But let's see where I find the same name. Sweden's in both. So the point is, there's different concepts of what makes a country you should be proud of. I happen to be very taken with the Scandinavian countries myself. In fact, I'm giving a talk called "Is America Ready for Scandinavian Capitalism?" Which is really, is it ready for running a country where college education is free, where everyone has health insurance, and so on and so forth. So in the good country study, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland are in that thinking subset of countries that care. Well, let me just move on because I want to get your questions too. GDP is the only measure, gross domestic product, that we tend to use every year to feel good or bad about our country's performance. But all it is a measure of how much goods and services were created that year. And, it does not make a distinction between whether the goods that you made were good or bad. I mean, just making more cigarettes and more whiskey and more guns makes a higher GDP. GDP does not include the value of household work and child raising by mothers. We put no measure on all the work that is involved there. And it doesn't measure the amount of time spent making the GDP. What if we made the GDP by all of us working 16 hours a day, no weekends? I mean, sure, you can get a lot more GDP that way, but you get a lot more prostration and death too. So GDP is an important measure, but it's not going to say anything about whether people, there's evidence that GDP can go up and happiness can go down at the same time. So, by the way, on happiness, just a few extra thoughts. It's usually what we're measuring is hedonic happiness, which is happy. It's your body feels good. You have bodily pleasure. John Stuart Mill, who took the common good standard from Bentham, he wanted more emphasis to be put on eudaimonic happiness, which the contemplation, the pleasure of the mind, and so on. So that raises the question of what kind of happiness should we be looking for and increasing. But I thought I would share that. And by the way, most nations, there is a question of, do we want to measure the amount of happiness that year or well-being that year? Now, they are pretty correlated. As people have better health and well-being and live longer, they're likely to be happier. And that's an easier thing to measure sometimes because you don't have to ask a person if they're happy. You just have to see if they have good health, they exercise a lot, they eat well, and so on. So there's a little question about, should we be measuring happiness or well-being or both, and so on and so forth. But the economists themselves should be mentioned because they had a theory that the best measure would be for common good is if you are passing a policy and the few people who are hurt by that policy can be compensated by those who are benefited, it's really a good policy. In other words, you're going to hurt some people. Look, a wealth tax is going to hurt some people. Higher worker wages is going to hurt some shareholders. Can the ones who benefited take some of the happiness or some of the financial benefit and give it back to make the unhappy just at least neutral in this? That is a whole branch of economics. It's called welfare economics. It's a very good logic, but it's not very practical about recompensating those who've been hurt. Many tools for increasing the common good. I just leave you with a list of all these activities that try to raise happiness. Some tools are amounting to protest action, which we see a lot of now, boycotts and civil disobedience. And they play a role, of course, in objecting to a world where too few people are happy and too many are being sad on. And you have some books coming along by to get companies to be better capitalists. And by the way, written by John McKay. Those of you who in the United States would know the company called oh God, what is the company? It's Best Foods, Whole Foods, the Whole Foods company. And by the way, there's a lot of companies that are joining this conscious capitalist movement to make capitalism more caring, basically, more responsible for more than just profits. I won't go into it in any details. Governments should be the institution designed to advance the common good, to provide good education, good health care, good protection of the environment, and so on. Unfortunately, governments around the world are split, fractioned, polarized. And when there are two sides, they can't agree on anything, and they are paralyzed. They're not adding anything. They're hurting the common good, basically. And there are government reforms that we need very badly. You could read the list. Maybe my slides would be available to all of you if you're interested. So I won't go into the details. But the thing is to guide the company to play a more active role in the government, in economic development. There's different ideas about what makes up a good government. One party comes in and says, "Oh, we're going to be government is best when it's minimal, when it's small, when it gets out of the way, when it doesn't put any regulations together of anything." And then there's another side that will say government has to be proactive. It has to be pro-social. It's got to actively make the economy better and make people's lives better. By the way, nonprofit organizations exist. I always thought they exist everywhere, and they do in a sense. But in the United States, we really developed a third sector. We had the private sector, business, basically, the government sector, and all those other organizations, which we call nonprofits. They would arise because the government wasn't doing the job. The Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, all of these associations to fill the holes that left by government not taking care of things. One of those organizations is called the Ashoka organization. It's worth looking into. Its duty, its job is to train people to do the common good, to get involved, to innovate, better communities, to everyone becoming a change maker, and so on. And by the way, let's compliment the United Nations. It has not lived up to everything we thought we would get from it, but it has been in the forefront of raising goals to improve the lives of people. In 2015, they released a new study of 17 sustainable goals to be accomplished by the year 2030. Cutting poverty in half, things like that. And the United Nations has a whole group working on improving the lives of people. I wrote 2 books because of my interest, and before I ever formulated the common good approach out of Bentham. And one called Confronting Capitalism, and 14 different things we have to do to make capitalism work better for the common good. And then I looked at democracy, which I thought was shaky and in decline, at least in the United States. It was too money oriented, too money measured, and what it needs to do to improve the common good. Now I'm going to leave you with this last slide because I want your questions, but the COVID is everywhere. All over the world, we are facing terrible virus. And it is posing three different problems. One is the trade-off between saving lives and saving livelihoods. I think the deaths now in the United States are over 175,000. And it's very, very bad because in the United States, we're so eager to get back to livelihood that we did it prematurely, and many people were what we call super spreaders. They could infect 1,000 people before they themselves know they're sick. We didn't put the measures of testing and contact tracing into place. We did the worst job possible, and we are outstanding in the world for mismanaging this COVID crisis. Then, and then this goes to another trade-off between lockdowns and freedom. It's going to take lockdowns, keeping people at home who are possibly sick or spreaders, and losing a little freedom. In other words, are people used to caring about the common good or only about their own good? And a lot of the freedom lovers talk about they don't want to wear a mask because that they are free not to wear a mask. They're free to infect people. They should be free to infect people. That's what they're saying, even if they don't put it that way. Then there's a trade-off right now, as August and September is when kids come back to school and colleges get reopened, about do we teach for the next year everyone virtually by automation? We teach by the computer, but not live teaching. Or do we put live teachers in front of people who might get sick and so on? That's another trade-off. So the common good is very important concept, and it's so related to happiness that I think we have to move toward a study, even not only at the national level of every country, about an index of not only GDP, but did happiness improve? But it should be even easy if you live in Miami to say, are people in Miami better off this year? Are people in San Francisco better off this year in terms of happiness and so on? Well, those are some thoughts about the common good, its relationship to the level of happiness, its relationship to the GDP. It all works together. And those of us in the movement of World Happiness Foundation believe that we must get more countries to care about measuring happiness. Bhutan did it. Bhutan started it, that wonderful country. We need to find more countries who, it may well be the resistance is the leaders worry that the study would show that happiness, that GDP went up and happiness went down. The resistance that's keeping us from getting these set up is that the leaders want to be reelected, and they don't want any study to show that happiness has fallen or wellness has fallen. So we have a lot ahead of in our effort to improve lives around the world. Thank you for listening to me, and I now look forward to getting any of your questions. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Kotler. It was wonderful hearing you. I have a couple of questions. The first one that comes to my mind is when you talk about COVID and the common good, and we are struggling on that part. Will we learn that COVID and the common bad, that if we do certain things, all of us will probably have a hard time and suffer? Could COVID teach us that?
Mm-hmm. I agree, Reki, that COVID is a direct issue for us about how it's striking down lives and families, and that it's so life is more important than livelihood at the time. And in fact, to be trying to prematurely get back to very active livelihood, something that a politician might want to do so he can say, look, the economy is blooming, so reelect me. That is not as, that's so short-sighted, because what it's going to do is going to elongate the period of COVID. If people come back prematurely, we may face COVID for the next, I made a prediction. This is a separate paper I wrote, that COVID will be around from between 3 to 6 years, not 1 year. From the way certain countries are handling it, and they can keep it down to just maybe 3 years before we really lick it with vaccines, and more than that, or it's going to last longer than that, which means that the stretch of unhappiness is perpetuated by this premature push toward getting livelihoods could be taken care of by money grants. Fortunately, my government decided to help those who are harmed and need help with that kind of thing. So your question about the relationship of happiness and the common good and the economy is very good.
Thank you, Dr. Kotler. Louis, do you want to go, or may I ask one more question?
Yes, please.
Maybe I can ask one and then you go for
yes,
this
please,
one.
please.
Okay.
Fantastic. So in this case, I mean, as marketeers, we really love to understand customer behavior, and in this case, stakeholder behaviors that goes down to human behavior. So absolutely. I think that I would like to focus on that, because everything is going down to decision making, but at the same time, we all as humans, and we are more connected than ever before. 7.6 billion people in the planet. At some point, we are hyper connected, and we are seeing this butterfly effect from decisions made by basically a bunch of people, 250 leaders with the OMS guiding from a scientific point of view. But then what we are seeing is very much common behaviors all around the world based on fear and based on scarcity. So from your strategic mindset, how do we manage behaviors? Can behaviors be managed at all? And what is the role of modern and the next generation of marketing in order to help advance the common good? Understanding behaviors, human behavior.
Yes. Actually, the field of marketing is a field which is really applied economics. I wanted to say that marketing tended to not be used or mentioned very much by economists. They were more interested in finance and things like that. And yet they finally realized that the old classic economics, which assumed that every person's behavior is to maximize their own happiness or benefit, was wrong. It was an assumption about how people behave, which was not the way people actually. People are more irrational than rational. Just examine your own life and your own decisions. You realize you did it for impulse, you did it for emotional reasons, and so on. Whatever decisions you're making. Now, marketers have known that for 100 years, but the economists finally agreed. It's called the new economics. They call it behavioral economics. And I wrote a paper saying behavioral economics is not new, it's marketing. Marketing was and is behavioral economics. We were the ones who studied how people behaved. We didn't want to make an assumption that they always rationally decided. Okay, now, given that we come from how people actually think and behave, and if we want to change behaviors, we need a marketing methodology. And I ended up calling it social cause marketing. Social marketing or social cause marketing. Let's take an example. People say they won't wear masks. Some people. And the problem might be we want to get more people to change their mind and wear a mask. Well, let's find out why. First of all, we will find out what demographic groups do wear masks. Maybe it's very important to get young men between 12 and 20 to wear masks, and there's some who don't. Well, what we do in marketing is we segment into different groups with different reasons for not wearing a mask, and then we figure out what incentives would change their behavior, what forces, what talk from their friends, their family would make a difference. And we can develop what we call a social marketing campaign to change behavior. We do that all the time with exercise and with better eating. Many people don't exercise. They don't eat well. We have many successful campaigns directed at, let's say, young women or older people that got them really interested in eating better or exercising regularly. So marketing carries with it a whole instrumental approach to helping move behavior toward more happy behavior, more common good behavior.
That's fantastic. So we have to talk more about how we do this with happiness. I think probably, Regison, you have a question about that.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, Dr. Kotler, you've had a grand life. I mean, you've written over 80 books and father of marketing. If you look back at your life, is there one event you can tell us which was very significant and meaningful to you?
There's a lot of events in anyone's lives that are treasured and so on. When I went to MIT for my PhD, I was asked by my Paul Samuelson, the Nobel-winning economist, who handled my committee, and my committee to be passed or not passed also had Robert, the other economist who was a Nobel Prize, Robert Solow. And the two of them grilled me for maybe near almost an hour, being tested in their room as to whether I should get my PhD from two Nobel Prize economists. And they asked me a question like, what is the Marxist theory of this? And all kinds of questions we had never even studied. And then I left the room feeling I did okay, but not sure of that. And then they walked out in about 10 minutes as if the decision was an easy one to make, but carrying a bottle of champagne. And without saying anything, they opened the champagne and said, "Congratulations." So that experience was very important to me. And then while at MIT, I was asked to go on a Ford Foundation trip to India. It was to study what can be done to improve labor in another country, the working conditions of labor and the pay of labor. And it was being carried out by four major economists, one of them at MIT, another at the University of Chicago, another at California. And it was called the labor problem and how to improve labor. And so I agreed to go with my wife to India, and we spent 9 months in India. And my work was about trying to prove that if Indian businesses would pay more money to workers, it would come back to them in better productivity and happier workers. In other words, it was a very idealistic idea. I was hoping that I could prove that by paying workers more money in India, the company will get back more. I have to admit that I failed. I could not find the data. I got data, but here's what happened. Many workers who were paid a little more left for the village. It's like they weren't socialized. They didn't like their life in the city. They got paid more, But as soon as they accumulated enough, they went back. They weren't socialized into the urban life and the other things. So, but this gave an opportunity, my wife and I, to really live in another country. And India, we got to see the Taj. We went all over Jaipur, and it was one of the highlights of our lives, you know, riding on a camel and an elephant and all those things. So it was a contrast to Western life that left me with lots of ideas. And that's why I ended up really starting the World Marketing Summit, which really started in Bangladesh, an interesting country in itself too. Muslim and not Hindu, but very interesting country. And we had our first World Marketing Summit there, which was to bring 20 of the leading marketing economists to Bangladesh for 3 days to figure out what we think would help their economy. And you know, Bangladesh was very good at textiles and some other things. And we, starting with that experience, we've been all around the world with the World Marketing Summit. We've had it in Japan several times. We've had it in Singapore, Russia. We've had World Marketing Summits. And right now, we're going to have on November 6th and 7th, a World Marketing Summit for the world with 60 speakers, all of them the leading marketing economic people. And people are buying tickets to spend with us and hear 60 different leading thinkers about how to improve the lives of people. So it's a common good kind of thing that we're doing. I'm very involved in that.
I love it. So we'll love to help you with that at some point and bring the concept of happiness to these 60 leaders and say, guys, how do we market happiness?
Right.
Something that I've been working on, Professor Kotler, is the concept of capitalism.
Capitalism?
Yes, that goes beyond conscious capitalism. So
okay.
At some point we have to talk, because we love to get your view on how to market an ideal system that it has to emerge. So actually is idealistic at the moment, because everything is changing. So it will be too much to tell people how to behave and the whole world how to behave. But we want to start a debate around capitalism as new systems. It's like, okay, how can we evolve systems, understanding that from a marketing point of view, it's all about behavioral economics. It's all about behaviors. So maybe we can talk about what to do with capitalism to advance the common good and to advance the common happiness. So maybe
one thought I have is that younger people in college are among the best prospects for caring about that beautiful idea. And if you could start on college campuses, you can start with people who are in retirement homes. You can start with you can start with women. They would be very happy. But it takes a lot of identifying who's ready for the idea and could become crusaders of the idea.
Absolutely. Well, I think that we are almost on time, so we are very conscious of your time as well. So I don't know if you have any final comments, Professor Kotler or Reiki Singh. It was beautiful, and it was really insightful listening to you.
Yeah,
Dr. Kotler, I have one final question. Of course, the session was wonderful, and all your thoughts are very well said and received. My question is, how happy are you, Dr. Kotler, and what is the reason for your happiness?
Okay, good. I never thought of it that way. I would be measured on your system as a very happy person. And I think it's founded on the fact that I have found something beyond myself to be happy about, because we know that if people are connected with something that's valuable and important to others and involves giving as well as getting, then they're likely to be happy too. So I'm very happy. For example, like you and others, I'm going through the COVID thing, which is really home-based. I think today is the 160th day I've been really home sheltered. We get everything delivered and there's no problem for me, but that's a terrible problem for many other people. And I'm taking it as two things. First, I've been doing a lot of writing and talking through the Zoom. And secondly, it's a great chance for my wife and I to watch a lot of good movies and read a lot of good books. And so I've been very happy. We're fortunate that the friends we have, who we stay in touch with through Zoom and so on, are very happy people. But they're mostly middle class people who have been we tend to be with a lot of people who've accomplished whatever they wanted to do, and have a community, and we talk and so on. So it's a good question that people must ask themselves. And when the people end up saying, I'm not a very happy person, what do we do about that? Why is that the case? What could that person do about the fact their life has been not a happy one? They can't make up for what they didn't have, but what can get them to a state where they can make new friends or find new hobbies? I wrote a whole paper on retirement because I felt that people, it's very important. Do you know that people are going to, over time, if modern medicine continues to improve, that the average person will live 100 years. That means that they'll be working from the age 20 to the age 60. That's 40 years. That means they have 40 more years. That is, they'll be 60, they'll retire and have 40 years of no job. So the question is, they've got to learn how to be happy when they don't work as well as when they do. And so the paper was about all the activities, learn a musical instrument, learn a foreign language, travel, all these things. So maybe a group that you should work with in the foundation is people who have retired very happy and those who have retired very unhappy. And what were the factors, and what could we do to train people who are working today to think about what they want to do with 40 years later, but start thinking about it now?
We take the advice. We are going to explore that. We'd love to, and we'll love to have you on board for that. And you will be the happy person. Now we have to find an unhappy one as well. Well, thank you again, Professor Kotler. Thank you so much, Regency, for your insightful questions. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining this fantastic conversation about the common good. Probably now we are more equipped to understand why things happen, how to deal with the situation that we are living today and we are going to be living in the future. And basically an invitation to everybody to be happiness. That's the only way we can really change. It's not just being happy, it's about being happiness and embracing the feeling of being happiness. Thank you so much, Professor Kotler.
Louis, thank you for starting the movement. And Reki, thank you for being part of it. And to all of you who see this, spread happiness around, share it with others. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kotler. It was amazing talking with you.
Thank you. Goodbye.